The wind cut deep in the Sangre de Cristo foothills. Jacob Fletcher learned that his first winter in northern New Mexico Territory in 1882, when his cabin dropped to 10 degrees inside despite burning 2 cords of wood in 1 month. He had built his chimney exactly the way every homesteader was told to build it. Heavy field stone walls, thick masonry, wide flue, standard and trusted. The fire smoldered, the draft stayed weak, and the stone soaked up every bit of heat before it could warm the room. Across the territory, settlers were losing the same battle in chimneys built by the book and failing by the season. Over the next year, Jacob quietly applied a method using lightweight volcanic rock that neighbors called wasteful pumice. His chimney created a draft so strong it used 30% less wood and kept his cabin warm all winter. While standard stone chimneys kept choking and wasting fuel, his strange volcanic rock design pulled smoke like a bellows. Today we'll break down the exact steps and principles behind this forgotten technique. What did Jacob understand about heat and airflow that every other builder missed? The snow began falling in early November, and by December it lay 3 feet deep across the high country. Night temperatures dropped to 15 below zero Fahrenheit, and even the hardiest mountain men spoke in hushed tones about the brutal cold. Wood had become precious cargo. A single cord of seasoned pine cost $8 at the trading post, when you could find it, and most settlers faced the grim arithmetic of winter. Burn too much too fast, and your family might not make it to spring. Jacob Fletcher had spent 15 years as a mountain freighter, hauling supplies through Colorado and New Mexico territory before settling his own claim. His father, Heinrich, had been a stonemason in the old country, working the volcanic hills outside Stuttgart, where farmers built their hearths from lightweight porous stone that looked like hardened foam. Jacob had grown up mixing mortar and stacking fieldstone on Colorado homesteads, watching his father select rocks with the practiced eye of a man who understood how materials behaved under heat and cold. During his freighting years, Jacob had bunked in dozens of cabins and trading posts, each with its own approach to staying warm. The native guides he worked with told stories about volcanic rock hearths in the high country that stayed warm long after the fire died down, but Jacob had dismissed these tales as campfire folklore. Every serious builder he knew used heavy stone or brick. That was the proven way. The conventional wisdom made perfect sense. Fieldstone cost nothing but the labor to haul it, and the massive chimneys looked substantial and permanent. The thicker the walls, the thinking went, the more durable and stable the chimney. Adobe brick worked the same way, absorbing and holding heat like a great stone furnace. Every homesteading guide and every old-timer who had survived multiple winters preached the same gospel: build it heavy, build it thick, build it to last. But by Christmas of 1882, that wisdom was killing people. Thomas Weaver, Jacob's nearest neighbor, burned through 2.5 cords by New Year's Day, and his cabin still felt like a tomb. The massive fieldstone chimney dominated one wall of his small log house, its thick stone walls drinking up heat faster than the fire could produce it. Smoke hung in lazy spirals, barely climbing the wide flue, and the hearth smoldered rather than roared. On the worst nights, when the wind howled down from the peaks, Weaver would wake to find ice crystals forming on the inside walls despite keeping the fire burning all night. 3 miles downstream, the Murphy family faced worse trouble. Their adobe brick chimney had developed a crack in the flue lining, where repeated heating and cooling caused the clay to expand and split. Fragments of brick fell into their fire, and thick creosote began building up in the damaged sections. By January, they were burning wood outside and carrying heated stones into the house rather than risk a chimney fire. The pattern repeated across every settlement Jacob could reach on snowshoes. Heavy masonry chimneys that looked solid and permanent were proving to be hungry, inefficient heat thieves. Families were burning 4 and 5 cords of wood to achieve what should have taken 2, and still their children went to bed shivering. Jacob began to remember his father's stories about the volcanic stone hearths of the German hill country. Heinrich had described rocks so light they almost floated, filled with tiny air bubbles that trapped heat instead of absorbing it. He remembered the native guides' tales about mountain hearths that burned clean and hot with half the wood. These memories nagged at him through the long January nights. When he shared these thoughts with his neighbors, The response was swift and dismissive. Weaver laughed outright. "You're talking about wasting good stone on pumice that'll collapse the first time you build a real fire. Besides, whoever heard of a rock chimney that actually draws smoke right when it's made of foam?" Bill Crawford, the foreman at the logging camp upstream, was even more blunt. "It's fancy tinkering, Fletcher. You stick with what works. Heavy stone holds heat and lasts forever." The supply trader at the territorial outpost shook his head when Jacob asked about volcanic rock. "You'll never get that draft up for a real fire. Light rock means weak chimney. Trust me, I've seen men freeze to death trying to get clever with their heating." But Jacob had also seen men freeze to death following conventional wisdom. In February, when the worst cold snap hit and 3 families temporarily abandoned their cabins to seek shelter in the communal buildings at the logging camp, he made his first tentative experiment. He found a slope 2 miles from his cabin where volcanic rock lay scattered like broken pottery, lightweight pieces that felt almost hollow in his hands. The rock was porous, filled with countless tiny holes that made it look like stone sponge. He hauled several loads back to his homestead and built a small trial flue in his lean-to woodshed, mixing clay mortar to stack the volcanic stones into a narrow chimney barely wide enough for the smoke from a small fire. The results were disappointing. The fire in his test hearth needed constant attention, burning through more logs than expected to maintain any useful heat. Smoke climbed sluggishly through the experimental flue, and the whole arrangement seemed to prove his critics right. The lightweight rock appeared to offer no advantage over conventional stone, and Jacob began to wonder if he was chasing folklore and wishful thinking. But something about the test intrigued him. The volcanic rock itself stayed warm longer than he expected, and when he examined the flue after several days of burning, he found far less soot buildup than in his main chimney. The smoke that did rise seemed cleaner, even if it moved slowly. Through the remainder of that brutal winter, Jacob continued to observe and experiment. He watched his neighbors struggle with their heavy masonry chimneys, burning through wood supplies and still failing to heat their homes adequately. He studied the behavior of different rock types under repeated heating and cooling. He began to suspect that the conventional wisdom about heavy stone chimneys was not just wrong but dangerously wrong for the climate and conditions of the high country. The question that would drive his work through the following seasons had crystallized. Could a properly built chimney using lightweight volcanic rock deliver the strong draft and fuel efficiency that frontier survival demanded, even if it contradicted everything the territory's builders believed about stone and fire? Spring came late in 1883, and with it, Jacob's opportunity to rebuild. The winter had taught him that his preliminary test in the woodshed had failed not because volcanic rock was unsuitable, but because he had built the wrong kind of flue. He had stacked the porous stones in a wide conventional pattern when what the material demanded was a completely different approach to flue construction. The breakthrough came from understanding heat behavior rather than simply following traditional masonry techniques. Jacob realized that his father's German hillside hearths had worked because the volcanic stone acted as insulation rather than thermal mass. When fire burned in a conventional heavy stone chimney, the thick walls absorbed enormous amounts of heat from the rising gases, cooling them down and reducing their buoyancy. Cold, sluggish gases created weak draft and incomplete combustion. But volcanic rock, with its countless air-filled pockets, barely absorbed heat at all. Jacob began cutting volcanic stone blocks from a deposit he had discovered on the north slope of a nearby ridge. The material was so light that a stone block the size of a traditional field stone weighed only half as much, yet it held together solidly when properly shaped. He split the blocks with a mason's hammer into rectangular pieces roughly 8 inches by 12 inches by 4 inches thick, creating uniform building units that would stack evenly with thin clay mortar joints. The key innovation was building a double-wall flue system. Jacob constructed the structural chimney using conventional fieldstone on the exterior, but lined the interior smoke passage with a shell of volcanic stone blocks. The inner lining created a flue opening just 10 inches square, much smaller than the typical wide flues that most builders considered necessary for good draft. Between the inner volcanic lining and outer structural wall, he left a 1-inch air gap that would serve as additional insulation. The volcanic stone blocks required different mortar than conventional masonry. Jacob mixed clay from a nearby creek bed with sand and chopped grass to create a mortar that would expand and contract with the porous stone without cracking. The mixture had to be thin enough to flow into the irregular surface of the volcanic rock, but thick enough to create weatherproof joints. Construction proceeded slowly through late spring. Each volcanic stone block had to be fitted individually, as the porous material broke unpredictably when forced into position. Jacob learned to shape each piece with careful hammer taps, removing high spots and filling low areas with clay mortar. The inner flue walls rose steadily, creating a smooth-sided passage that would channel smoke upward without the turbulence created by irregular stone surfaces. By early summer, Jacob was ready for his first test of the completed system. He had built the new flue into his existing chimney, replacing only the inner liner while leaving the structural stone walls intact. The transition from his old wide fireplace throat to the narrow 10-inch flue required careful shaping with fire-resistant clay, creating a funnel that would accelerate smoke velocity as it entered the insulated passage. The test fire revealed the difference immediately. Jacob lit kindling at sunset on a calm June evening when outside temperature held steady at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 20 minutes, he could feel warm air rising from the volcanic stone flue liner, and smoke climbed swiftly upward in a tight column. The draft pulled so strongly that he had to adjust his fire-building technique, using smaller pieces of kindling to avoid creating flames too large for the controlled airflow. The volcanic stone lining heated rapidly, reaching temperatures that would be uncomfortable to touch within 40 minutes of lighting the fire. But unlike the massive heat absorption of conventional stone, this heat stayed on the surface of the flue walls, maintaining the temperature of rising gases rather than stealing their heat. Hot gases remained buoyant throughout their journey up the chimney, creating consistent upward flow that pulled fresh air into the fire and maintained complete combustion. Jacob tested different wood types and fire sizes through the summer months, carefully documenting fuel consumption and heat output. Burning identical amounts of seasoned oak in his new system versus a neighbor's conventional stone chimney, he found consistent differences. The volcanic stone flue delivered the same room heat with roughly 30% less wood, and fires started more reliably in all weather conditions. The mechanism became clear through repeated observation. Conventional heavy stone flues acted like massive heat sinks, absorbing thermal energy from combustion gases and cooling them as they rose. Cool gases moved slowly and created weak draft, requiring more fuel to maintain combustion and losing much of their heat to the chimney structure rather than delivering it to the living space. The insulated volcanic stone flue maintained gas temperatures, preserving buoyancy and draft strength while allowing more heat to reach the room. Jacob discovered that flue sizing was critical to the system's performance. A 10-inch square passage provided optimal velocity for most residential fires, while wider flues allowed gases to slow and cool. Narrower passages created excessive restriction that could cause smoke to back up into the room. The volcanic stone lining had to be built with perfectly smooth interior surfaces, as any irregularities would create turbulence that disrupted the steady upward flow. Different types of volcanic stone produced varying results. The lightest, most porous specimens worked best, while denser volcanic rocks performed little better than conventional stone. Jacob learned to test each stone by dropping it in water. The best insulating stones would float briefly before slowly sinking, indicating maximum air content and minimum density. The system offered several construction variations depending on available materials and structural requirements. Where volcanic stone was scarce, Jacob found that crushing small pieces and mixing them into clay mortar created an effective insulating lining for conventional stone flues. Where structural strength was critical, he built triple wall systems with outer stone for stability, middle air gap for insulation, and inner volcanic lining for heat retention. By autumn, 3 neighboring homesteaders had quietly approached Jacob about modifying their chimneys. Word was spreading through practical demonstration rather than argument. The brutal winter ahead would provide the ultimate test of whether this unconventional approach could deliver the fuel efficiency and reliable heat that frontier survival demanded. The volcanic stone flue solved half the heating puzzle, but Jacob soon discovered that superior draft meant nothing without proper firebox design. Even with hot gases rising efficiently through his insulated chimney, too much heat was still disappearing into the massive stone walls surrounding his fireplace. The traditional deep hearth that most frontier builders considered essential was actually working against efficient heat delivery. Jacob's existing firebox extended 4 feet back into the chimney wall, following the standard frontier pattern of deep masonry chambers that supposedly captured and stored heat. But observation through the autumn months revealed a different reality. The deep recess created swirling air currents that pulled room air into the fire faster than necessary, while the thick back and side walls absorbed radiant heat that should have been warming his cabin. Worse, the wide opening allowed too much heated room air to escape up the chimney along with the smoke. The solution came from an unexpected source. During a November supply run to Santa Fe, Jacob encountered a traveling engineer named Samuel Morrison who had studied fireplace designs in wealthy Eastern homes. Morrison described the work of Count Rumford, a British inventor who had revolutionized fireplace efficiency decades earlier by making fireboxes shallow rather than deep, with steeply angled back walls that reflected heat outward instead of absorbing it. Rumford's principle was mathematically precise. A shallow firebox with its back wall angled at 45 degrees would reflect radiant heat directly into the room rather than letting it soak into masonry. The angled surface acted like a mirror, bouncing thermal energy forward where people could feel it instead of backward where stone would swallow it. Morrison sketched the concept on brown paper, showing how the slanted back wall created a focused beam of heat radiation. But adapting Rumford's design to frontier conditions required significant modifications. Wealthy Eastern homes could afford specially shaped fire bricks and precise masonry angles, while frontier builders needed solutions using field stone, clay mortar, and basic tools. Jacob realized he would have to rebuild his entire hearth interior, creating the angled geometry using materials at hand. The reconstruction began in early December, during a brief warm spell that allowed masonry work. Jacob carefully dismantled the deep back wall of his existing firebox, salvaging usable stones while exposing the connection point where his new volcanic stone flue began. The shallow replacement would extend only 24 inches from front to back, less than 2/3 the depth of conventional frontier hearths. Creating the angled back wall proved more challenging than Jacob had anticipated. He built a wooden form, angling it at 45 degrees from vertical, then stacked flat field stones against this template using thick clay mortar to fill irregular gaps. Each stone had to be carefully positioned to maintain the smooth, reflecting surface that would direct heat forward. Rough or protruding stones would create turbulence and reduce the reflecting effect. The sidewalls also required modification. Instead of building them parallel to each other like most frontier fireboxes, Jacob angled them slightly inward, creating a funnel shape that concentrated heat radiation toward the room opening. The narrowing geometry compressed the fire's radiant energy into a more focused beam while still providing adequate space for burning logs. The critical innovation was the throat construction where the firebox connected to his volcanic stone flue. Jacob built a carefully shaped transition zone that compressed the fire's gases from the wide hearth opening down to the 10-inch square flue entrance. This throat measured 8 inches high and 12 inches wide, creating a smooth funnel that accelerated smoke velocity as it entered the insulated chimney system. The throat required a deflector plate to prevent downdrafts and guide smoke smoothly upward. Jacob shaped a curved piece of flat field stone that extended partially across the throat opening, creating a baffle that forced rising gases to follow a specific path rather than swirling randomly. The deflector also prevented wind-driven air from flowing down the chimney and disrupting combustion. Testing began on Christmas Day, 1883, with outside temperature holding steady at 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Jacob built his first fire in the rebuilt hearth, using the same seasoned oak logs he had measured for previous tests. The difference was immediately apparent. Heat struck his face and hands with noticeable intensity, radiating directly from the angled stone back wall rather than disappearing into deep masonry recesses. The shallow firebox changed fire behavior in several important ways. Logs burned more completely because better air circulation prevented the smoldering that occurred in deep hearths. The angled back wall reflected heat from the burning wood back onto unburned portions of the logs, creating more thorough combustion and extracting more energy from each piece of fuel. Smoke rose in a steady column through the throat, drawn efficiently by the volcanic stone flue above. Room temperature measurements confirmed the hearth modification's effectiveness. Starting from a baseline of 32 degrees Fahrenheit, at sunset, Jacob's cabin reached 58 degrees within 90 minutes of lighting the fire. His previous deep hearth had required nearly 3 hours to achieve similar warming, and had never sustained such comfortable temperatures through an entire evening. Fuel consumption dropped dramatically. The combination of efficient combustion, effective heat radiation, and strong draft allowed Jacob to maintain livable indoor temperatures using roughly 60% of the wood required by his old system. A single armload of split oak logs that previously provided 2 hours of useful heat now delivered nearly 4 hours of consistent warmth. The throat and deflector system eliminated the smoke problems that plagued many frontier hearths. Even on windy nights when neighboring cabins suffered from downdrafts and backflow, Jacob's carefully designed transition guided smoke smoothly upward through the insulated flue. The deflector prevented outdoor air from flowing down the chimney while still allowing complete evacuation of combustion gases. Jacob discovered that log placement became critical in the shallow firebox. Wood had to be stacked differently than in deep hearths, with pieces arranged to take maximum advantage of the reflecting back wall. Logs placed too far forward received less radiant energy from the angled surface, while logs positioned correctly created a self-reinforcing combustion cycle where reflected heat helped ignite adjacent fuel. The modified hearth also changed fire maintenance requirements. The efficient combustion and strong draft meant that fires needed less frequent attention, burning more steadily with less tendency to smolder or die unexpectedly. Jacob could load the firebox at bedtime and wake to find useful coals still glowing, ready to accept fresh fuel without complete relighting. By January's end, Jacob had achieved what seemed impossible to his neighbors, a heating system that kept his cabin comfortable through the worst cold while using less wood than anyone else in the territory. The combination of insulated flue and efficient hearth design had created a heating solution that worked with frontier materials and frontier skills, yet delivered performance that surpassed conventional wisdom by measurable margins. The efficient hearth and insulated flue had solved combustion and heat delivery, but Jacob discovered a new problem during the brutal February of 1884. When fires died down overnight, or during warmer periods when heating wasn't needed, his improved chimney system became a pathway for heat loss. The strong draft that made his fires burn efficiently also pulled warm interior air up the chimney whenever combustion stopped, replacing it with frigid outside air that flowed through cabin gaps and cracks. The solution required controlling airflow when the heating system wasn't actively burning fuel. Jacob had observed this principle in the iron stoves used by railroad crews, which featured adjustable dampers that could throttle air movement through the stovepipe. But adapting damper control to a masonry chimney system demanded different techniques and materials. Jacob's first innovation was a throat damper installed just above his carefully shaped firebox opening. He forged a flat iron plate that spanned the throat width, mounting it on a simple pivot mechanism made from bent iron rod. The damper could swing from fully open during active burning to nearly closed when the fire was banked or extinguished, reducing the chimney's tendency to suck warm air from the cabin. The damper plate required precise sizing and positioning. Too large, and it would restrict smoke flow during active burning, causing dangerous backups into the living space. Too small, and it would fail to control unwanted airflow when closed. Jacob settled on a rectangular iron plate measuring 10 inches by 6 inches, positioned so that when fully opened, it created minimal obstruction to rising gases. But when rotated to the closed position, it blocked roughly 80% of the throat opening. Operating the damper demanded careful attention to combustion phases. Jacob learned to open it fully when lighting fires and during active burning periods, but to partially close it when banking coals for overnight burning. Complete closure was only safe when all combustion had ceased and no glowing embers remained. A simple iron rod extended through the cabin wall, allowing damper adjustment from inside without opening the hearth area. The chimney top presented another control challenge. Wind flowing over Jacob's cabin created pressure differences that could reverse normal draft, pushing cold air down the chimney and forcing smoke back into the room. Standard frontier practice was to build chimneys tall enough to clear these wind effects, but even tall chimneys suffered from downdrafts during severe weather. Jacob constructed a wind-directional cap using materials available at the local blacksmith shop. The cap consisted of a slanted iron roof mounted several inches above the chimney opening, supported by 4 iron posts. The slanted surface deflected wind upward, creating a low-pressure zone above the chimney opening that enhanced natural draft rather than fighting it. The gap between cap and chimney allowed smoke to exit freely while preventing rain and snow from entering the flue. The cap design incorporated side shields made from salvaged sheet metal that blocked horizontal wind from striking the chimney opening directly. These shields extended down the sides of the chimney top, creating a sheltered zone where rising smoke could exit without interference from crosswinds. The entire assembly was anchored to the chimney with iron straps and mortar, strong enough to withstand the fierce mountain winds that regularly exceeded 40 miles per hour. For extended periods when no heating was needed, Jacob developed an auxiliary closure system using a removable clay plug. During mild weather in late spring and early autumn, when fires weren't necessary for days at a time, he would insert a specially shaped clay stopper into the throat opening, completely sealing the chimney to prevent any air exchange. The clay plug was formed to fit precisely in the throat, with a small iron handle that allowed easy removal when heating became necessary again. Wood preparation became equally critical to the system's efficiency. Jacob had learned that moisture content dramatically affected combustion quality and heat output. Green or partially seasoned wood created excessive smoke, reduced heat production, and contributed to creosote buildup in the volcanic stone flue. Proper seasoning required cutting firewood during late spring when SAP flow was minimal, then allowing at least 6 months of drying before use. Jacob's seasoning technique involved cutting logs to precise lengths that fit his modified firebox dimensions. Pieces were split to expose maximum surface area to air circulation, with split faces oriented to catch prevailing winds that would accelerate moisture evaporation. The wood was stacked in rows with gaps between pieces to allow airflow, elevated on flat stones to prevent ground moisture from re-wetting the lower layers. The seasoning area was positioned to take advantage of natural wind patterns while remaining accessible during winter storms. Jacob built a simple roof structure using salvaged boards and tar paper, protecting the wood from rain and snow while leaving the sides open for air circulation. Properly seasoned wood would produce a sharp crack when 2 pieces were struck together and would feel noticeably lighter than fresh-cut timber of the same size. Storage location proved almost as important as seasoning technique. Wood stored too far from the cabin became difficult to retrieve during severe weather, while wood stored too close risked drawing moisture from melting snow or rain runoff. Jacob established 3 storage zones, a main seasoning area 50 yards from the cabin, an intermediate storage pile 20 yards away for wood that would be used within 2 weeks, and a small inside cache near the hearth containing enough fuel for 3 days of continuous burning. The indoor wood storage required careful management to prevent introducing excess moisture into the cabin. Freshly brought in wood was stacked near the hearth, but not close enough to create fire hazards, allowing any surface moisture to evaporate before the wood was burned. Jacob learned to rotate his indoor supply regularly, using older pieces first and replacing them with wood from the intermediate outdoor pile. Winter fuel management also involved understanding burn rates and heat output for different wood species. Oak provided long-lasting coals ideal for overnight heating, while pine ignited quickly for morning startup. Cottonwood burned cleanly but produced less heat per volume, requiring larger quantities but creating minimal ash buildup. Jacob maintained separate stacks of different wood types, selecting fuel appropriate for specific heating needs. The combination of draft control, weather protection, and proper fuel preparation created a heating system that could be precisely managed for maximum efficiency. During a March cold snap that tested all these innovations together, Jacob's cabin maintained comfortable temperatures using just 1 cord of properly seasoned oak, while his nearest neighbor burned through nearly 2 cords of mixed wood and still struggled with temperature control and smoke problems. The systematic approach to ventilation and fuel management completed Jacob's heating solution, transforming what had begun as a simple chimney modification into a comprehensive system that addressed every aspect of frontier heating efficiency. The winter of 1884 delivered the ultimate test. A massive Arctic front settled over the territory in late January, bringing 2 weeks of sustained cold that dropped nighttime temperatures to 20 below zero Fahrenheit and kept daytime readings below zero for 12 consecutive days. Fierce winds gusted over 50 miles per hour, driving snow into every crack and crevice while creating wind chill conditions that made outdoor work nearly impossible. The territorial supply roads became impassable, cutting off wood deliveries just when fuel demand reached its peak. Jacob's comprehensive heating system faced its first true survival test under conditions that had killed frontier families in previous years. The extreme cold stressed every component simultaneously. The volcanic stone flue had to maintain draft in sub-zero temperatures. The modified hearth had to deliver maximum heat output from limited fuel supplies, and the draft control system had to prevent heat loss during the extended periods when maintaining continuous fires became impossible. The wind directional cap proved its worth during the first severe storm. While neighboring chimneys suffered from downdrafts that forced smoke back into cabins, Jacob's slanted iron roof and side shields maintained consistent upward draft, even when horizontal winds exceeded 40 miles per hour. The low pressure zone created above his chimney opening continued drawing smoke efficiently, allowing him to maintain clean combustion throughout the storm. Temperature monitoring revealed the system's remarkable performance under extreme conditions. With outside air at 15 below zero Fahrenheit and sustained winds creating additional heat loss through cabin walls, Jacob maintained interior temperatures between 42 and 58 degrees using carefully banked fires that burned continuously for 6 days. His fuel consumption during this critical period totaled exactly 1¼ cords of seasoned oak, precisely measured from his carefully organized wood cache. Neighboring homesteads faced catastrophic heating failures during the same period. Thomas Weaver's conventional stone chimney developed severe creosote buildup that ignited on the 4th night, creating a dangerous flue fire that forced his family to extinguish their heating system until the chimney could be cleaned. The Murphy family's cracked adobe chimney became completely unusable when repeated freeze-thaw cycles widened the flue damage, forcing them to abandon their cabin and seek shelter at the logging camp's communal bunkhouse. The Hendricks family, living in a well-built cabin 3 miles upstream, burned through 4½ cords during the 2-week cold snap while struggling to maintain interior temperatures above freezing. Their massive fieldstone chimney consumed heat faster than their fires could produce it, creating a losing battle against the Arctic conditions that left them burning furniture and interior wallboards to supplement their dwindling wood supply. Jacob's systematic approach to fuel management proved equally critical. His 3-zone storage system allowed him to maintain continuous access to properly seasoned wood despite snowdrifts that reached 5 feet around his cabin. The covered intermediate storage area remained accessible throughout the storm, while his indoor cache provided the buffer needed to weather the worst conditions without venturing outside for fuel. The volcanic stone flue demonstrated unexpected durability advantages during the extreme temperature cycling. Conventional heavy masonry chimneys suffered cracking and spalling as rapid heating and cooling caused stone expansion and contraction. The lightweight porous structure of Jacob's flue liner absorbed these thermal stresses without damage, maintaining structural integrity and smoke-drawing efficiency throughout the temperature extremes. More importantly, the insulated flue prevented the condensation problems that plagued standard chimneys during the cold snap. When warm smoke contacted freezing stone surfaces in conventional flues, moisture condensed and froze, creating ice blockages that reduced draft and caused dangerous smoke backup. Jacob's warm flue walls prevented condensation, maintaining clear passage for combustion gases even during the coldest nights. By the end of February, word of Jacob's success had spread through subtle observation rather than dramatic announcement. Neighbors who had initially mocked his volcanic stone experiment began asking quiet questions about construction details and material sources. The undeniable evidence of superior performance during life-threatening conditions had overcome skepticism more effectively than any amount of theoretical explanation. James Patterson, a carpenter who had helped build several conventional chimneys in the area, approached Jacob in early March with a request to examine the volcanic stone construction techniques. Patterson had witnessed the winter failures of standard systems and recognized the practical advantages of the insulated flue design. He became the first to attempt replication, modifying his own cabin's chimney using volcanic stone blocks quarried from the same ridge where Jacob had found his materials. The adaptation process required careful attention to local variations in available stone. Patterson discovered that not all volcanic rock performed equally well, and learned to select the lightest, most porous specimens by testing their insulating properties with small fires. His modified chimney incorporated Jacob's double wall design, but used a slightly different throat configuration adapted to his existing hearth dimensions. Sarah McKinnon, a widow managing her homestead alone, implemented a simplified version of the system using crushed volcanic rock mixed into clay mortar to line her existing stone flue. This technique required less skilled masonry work, while still providing significant insulation benefits. Her fuel consumption dropped by nearly 40% compared to the previous winter, allowing her to maintain independence despite limited physical ability to cut and haul large quantities of wood. The quiet adoption continued through the following years as practical results spoke louder than skepticism. By 1887, 5 homesteads within 10 miles of Jacob's claim had incorporated some version of the volcanic stone principle into their heating systems. The modifications varied based on available materials and construction skills, but all shared the core insight that insulated flues dramatically improved heating efficiency and reduced fuel consumption. The technique's influence extended beyond individual homesteads. When the Territorial Logging Company built new bunkhouses in 1889, the construction supervisor specified lightweight stone liners for all chimney systems after observing the performance advantages in existing installations. The company's records showed measurably lower wood consumption in buildings equipped with insulated flues compared to those using conventional heavy masonry construction. Decades later, mining camps and railroad construction crews continued using variations of the volcanic stone chimney technique throughout the volcanic regions of the American West. The principle had evolved from one man's desperate experiment into accepted practice for anyone building efficient heating systems in harsh climates with limited fuel supplies. The lesson had proven itself through the most demanding test of all: survival through winters that killed those who trusted conventional wisdom over practical innovation.